you. Thank you very much, Reinhard. Thanks so much for coming and joining us today. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to talk to you about my latest book, The Complete Language of Birds. This is an encyclopedia of folklore and mythology about 400 different bird species around the world. So let's take a little trip here. In the beginning, there was a goose. This goose, in fact, an Egyptian goose, and at the time, the only being in the universe. Egyptians called it Gengen-ware, or the Great Honker. This goose carried and protected the egg that, when hatched, would produce all of the life on Earth. But another being actually laid the egg. Go figure this. Geb, god of Earth, also known by the nickname Great Cackler. Whether or not Geb was actually a goose himself is subject to interpretation, but when he evolved into human form over the centuries, he often wore an Egyptian goose or another bird as part of his headdress. This was some kind of gull. Egypt's creation story actually includes yet another being, Amun, Lord of the Thrones, who also liked to take the form of a goose, as you can see in this petroglyph that we managed to find. In fact, the legend says that Amun's goose cry of victory over his adversaries became the very first sound heard by the people of Earth. And to commemorate this, Amun is known as the Great Shrieker. So, Geb laid a golden egg that contained the sun. Gengen-ware incubated and hatched the egg that brought all the other beings into existence, and Amun's goose presence scared off all the early adversaries, and the result was, well, let there be light. Who knew that a goose could be so powerful? Meanwhile, down at the southern tip of Africa, another creation was going on. The indigenous Khoisan people tell the story of their creator, a god called Swigo, who ignited a great fire to bring all of the traits of the animals out of the ether and into reality. He gathered all of these traits and he baked them into all kinds of animal shapes. Gives new meaning to your Christmas cookies, doesn't it? And as he did this, a Cory bustard, a very large bird with broad wings, served as his helper. The Cory bustard fanned the flames continually with his wings, keeping the fire burning until all of the animals were fully baked. And that's how we got animals. And in a wonderful Aboriginal legend from Australia, all life begins in the dark, skulking its way around Earth as best it can. The spirits of the sky spend part of an eternity deciding how they would bring light into the world. They built a huge pile of sticks that they planned to ignite, but they didn't want to frighten all the little beings on the ground by suddenly producing some big burst of light that they'd never seen before. So one day, an emu named Dinawan and a brolga named Bralach sat side by side on their nests, protecting the eggs in the dark. As they talked about the children that they would soon bring into the world, they began to argue about whose children would be stronger, whose would be better, whose would be smarter, like any two women. The discussion became more and more heated, and finally Bralach grabbed one of Dinawan's eggs in her bill and used all of her fury to throw it up into the air as high as she could. So high did it go that it collided with that huge pile of sticks collected by the spirits. The egg broke open. Somehow the yolk ignited the pile of sticks, which kindled into a great bonfire. The sky lit up, bathed the earth in light, and showed everyone just how beautiful Australia was. And from that day forward, the spirits decided that they would build a great fire every morning to light up the earth and let it burn until evening. But they still worried that to transition to light every day would frighten the animals, so they searched for one animal who could call to everyone each morning before they lit the fire to let them know the light was on its way soon. And which animal did they choose? The kookaburra. Who else? Anyone who's been to Australia knows the laughing kookaburra, who was only too happy to volunteer to play this important role. And to this day, this devoted bird wakes up an entire continent every morning just before sunrise. It sounds like this. Can you hear that? No? A little bit? Yeah. Okay. You do that. After the birds helped get the world up and running, they continued to play pivotal roles in the early days of the Earth. One of the big surprises for me in my research for this book, The Complete Language of Birds, was the sheer number of cultures around the world that have a great flood as part of their origin story. We all know the story of Noah and the Ark, of course, and that as the waters began to recede, once the 40-day flood stopped, Noah first released a raven and then a dove to see if they would find land. The raven never returned, and the guess among ornithologists is that maybe it found some nice waterlogged carrion to munch on and just never forgot all about the Ark. But the dove felt more of a duty to Noah for saving its life, so it brought back the olive leaf. This meant that land had begun to emerge from the waters. Well, other cultures tell the story a little differently. In some areas of the United States, Christians associate the painted bunting, this gorgeous little bird, with the rainbow that God sent to Noah as a sign of his covenant with the earth. Painted buntings are the living embodiment of the rainbow. If you've ever seen one, anyone here ever seen a painted bunting in person? Yeah, is that something? It really does feel like a reminder that God protects us and will not destroy his creation again. But in the Bericek area of Turkey, people believe that Noah released a northern bald ibis from the ark, a bird they see as a symbol of fertility to guide the repopulation of the earth. And the Athabascans of Alaska believe that the Great Flood came to an end with the help of the American bittern. The bittern swallowed enormous amounts of water, flew to where more water would do the most good, and regurgitated the water to form new rivers. Now, an Ojibwa legend tells us that long ago, the Creator sent a great flood to purify the world and drown everything evil. But one man, Wayne Abuju, worked quickly and built himself a raft, managed to keep himself and just a few animals afloat for an entire month as they waited for the water to recede. But the water didn't go down. So he summoned several different birds to dive to the bottom and retrieve some dirt from the old world, which he would use to start a new continent. Well, the loon was the logical savior. It's a bird that dives. It's a big bird. It has a lot of strength. But he tried and he failed. Then the dove, of all things, volunteered, and well, you can imagine how that went. So the poor thing nearly drowned, and finally a lone coot took on the challenge without telling anyone what he intended. Time passed before the other birds even noticed he was gone, this little black bird. But then they started to search for him, and they found him floating behind the raft, unconscious, but still breathing. And when they pried his bill apart to resuscitate him, they found just that little bit of earth that they needed to restart the continent. So the coot is the whole reason we have North America. It's worth noting that a lot of other Native American legends of the Great Flood tell the same story, but with a different waterfowl as the hero. In the Algonquin culture, for example, it's a merganser who brings up the morsel of earth, using its strong feet to push its way down, all the way down to the bottom. And according to a Maori legend in New Zealand, the god Tawaki, who makes lightning and thunder, caused the flood when he created the crystal floor of heaven. The crystal floor caused all the water in the sky to fall on Fjordland, where the Fjordland penguins live. This area receives some of the most torrential rain in New Zealand, so the Fjordland penguins have been credited with actually making this rain fall, and perhaps assisting Tawaki in creating the Great Flood. And in the jungles of Panama, the Great Flood serves as an origin story for the great tinamou, this little sort of drab bird. It seems that after the flood covered the world in water, the sun returned and a rainbow appeared. And the great tinamou, which this drab-colored bird that blends right in with the foliage, saw the rainbow and was frightened nearly to death by its intense colors. So it flew away from all the other animals and retreated into the murkiest part of the forest, where it remains to this day, shunning color in favor of darkness. These are just a few of the flood-related stories I found in which birds play a starring role. But the amazing birds have many more lessons to teach us throughout the world's folklore and mythology. So before I started work on the complete language of birds, I really not thought much about what birds represented to ancient civilizations. We take so much of our knowledge for granted now. Science is just something that's part of our lives. But when these people looked at the world around them and all the things they couldn't explain, they filled in some of the gaps with birds and their amazing abilities. So here's one of my favorite examples. Before science understood what we do now about migration and how it happens, and that was really a pretty recent discovery, it seemed to many observers that birds just vanished in the fall and re-emerged in spring from whatever hiding place they had used over the winter. One of the most bizarre theories about this involves the barnacle goose, a European species not unlike our own Canada goose. Theorists back in the 500s saw barnacles along wharves and docks and on the bottoms of their boats, and they guessed that the geese transformed themselves into these tiny little barnacles for the winter, adhered to the surface on the underside of boats and piers and to wait it out the frigid weather, and in spring, the warmer weather gave them the cue they needed to change back. Aristotle was one of the people who proposed this theory. And back in 350 BC, the learned Greek philosopher Aristotle also theorized that swallows, with their ability to dive so close to the surface of lakes, we've all seen them do this, actually dove to the bottom of the lake in fall and burrowed down into the mud to wait out the winter. Apparently the whole oxygen thing didn't really occur to Aristotle. Probably didn't know what that was yet. But this theory actually held on until the late 1700s, when sailors returning to Europe from warmer climates at the end of the winter reported seeing flocks of swallows in Africa and managed to put two and two together. Oh, these are probably the same swallows we get. Then, in 1822, German villagers shot down a white stork that had a wooden spear piercing its neck. The spear was made of unusual wood that could only have come from Africa. In a flash of insight, the German hunters realized that this bird must have migrated all the way to another continent and all the way back. So a single white stork finally changed the way ornithologists understood migration in 1822. That being said, so much of what people around the world attribute to birds has really nothing at all to do with science. Wondrous parrots like the imperial Amazon and the gray parrot here are believed to have the ability to communicate with the spiritual realm. Not only can they fly high enough to reach the gods in the clouds, but they can actually form words. So you may need to watch what you say around one, because he might rat you out to your deceased loved ones. One of our favorite North American birds, the anhinga, has represented a lot of different things in different cultures. We know this bird's classic stance, holding its wings out from its sides to dry after diving for a fish dinner. Some Christians see this as a symbol of the crucifix. That's a natural thing, making the anhinga a perpetual reminder of the Passion of Christ, and therefore selfless, forgiving, and holy. But on the other hand, the indigenous Tupi people of Brazil gave the anhinga its name, which means devil bird in their language. They determined that the anhinga is a trickster and a troublemaker, and why not? The bird swims with its body submerged and only its head and neck out of the water, like a snake, the sneakiest animal on the planet. And here's one of my favorites. Two categories of birds, magpies and mynas, require us to be especially respectful when we see them, asking after their health and their family's welfare. If we treat them with disdain or we ignore them altogether, we may meet a particular fate based on how many of the birds we see together. There's even a nursery rhyme to make this clear. 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, 4 for a boy, 5 for silver, 6 for gold, 7 for a secret never to be told. So whenever you see a myna or a magpie, be sure to greet it warmly. Good afternoon, sir or ma'am. How are you today? Is your family well? If you're with a group and you don't want to look like a lunatic, just smile and nod or bow slightly, and I'm told that the mynas and the magpies will understand. In Hawaii, mynas are everywhere. They're like the robins that we have here, and we were just in Hawaii in May, and I spent the whole trip doing this. We don't want to get bad luck from the mynas. One of my favorite stories involves the common kingfisher, a gorgeous bright blue bird of the rivers and lakes of Europe, Southeast Asia, part of the Asian continent, and of course related to the belted kingfisher that we have here. This is the tragic tale of Ceyx and Alcyone, two lovers in the days when Greek culture involved many gods living on Mount Olympus. Ceyx and Alcyone were soulmates, but equally important at the time, they were particularly well matched in physical beauty. This made the couple very popular with the gods. They watched them like we watch The Bachelor. The pair married, they began a life together, and they were so happy that they gave each other little nicknames. Unfortunately, they chose to call each other Zeus and Hera, the names of the king and queen of the gods in the Greek pantheon. Well, instead of being flattered, Zeus got very angry. Zeus is kind of a jerk. So one day, when Ceyx boarded a ship to Ionia, Zeus kicked up a storm and his wrath created a massive wave that swallowed up the ship. Ceyx drowned and his body sank to the bottom of the sea. Hera, however, knew how devastated Alcyone would be if she never knew for certain what had happened to Ceyx. So as she watched the young woman wait and weep by the shore, Hera caused Ceyx's body to wash up right near where Alcyone waited for word of him. But Alcyone, anguished by her loss, threw herself into the sea and drowned. Well, now Zeus felt bad. He resurrected them both from the dead and turned the lovers into what he called halcyon birds, naming them for Alcyone. Today we know them as common kingfishers, and every summer for 2 weeks, the winds grow calm so kingfishers can nest on the beach and bring a brood into the world. We call these the halcyon days, a period of calm and happiness, and Alcyone remains part of the taxonomic name for several of the world's kingfishers. Now, have you ever wondered how goldfinches got their bright yellow color? Or people did, and the story has been passed down for generations. It seems that a fox chased a raccoon to make a little band in his dinner. The raccoon ran up a tree, so the hungry fox waited all day at the bottom, but the raccoon did not come down. Eventually, the fox dozed off, and when he awoke, he found not only was the raccoon gone, but before it left, it painted the fox's eyes shut with resin from the tree. The resin had hardened and it wouldn't come off, so the fox called and called and called for help, and some drab little finches in the neighborhood finally took pity on him, flew in, and pecked off the resin. The fox thanked them for this good deed by using some yellow flowers nearby to color their plumage bright yellow, the color of sunshine. The goldfinches wear this plumage all spring and summer to this day. And this is common goldenrod, one of the things, or Canada goldenrod, excuse me, one of the plants around here that may have been what the fox chose. So the story of the trapped fox and the helpful bird is one of the tales that shows up in folklore of many different cultures, where it may be used to explain a hummingbird's iridescence or the bright colors of the northern cardinal. We can imagine people of many different tribes coming together thousands of years ago in meeting places like Chaco Canyon in New Mexico, Lopatki in Arizona, or in this place pictured here, now known as Aztec Ruins National Monument in New Mexico. There they would trade goods, they'd tell stories in kivas or in the shadows of ceremonial mounds, and one tribe might have an explanation for a specific thing that other tribes haven't considered yet, so they would just adopt that other story. Now, few birds have inspired as many folk tales about themselves as the northern lapwing, a well-known and easily recognized bird of Europe and Asia. Now, a Swedish story tells us of a young woman serving as a handmaiden to the Holy Mother Mary in Sweden. I try not to think too hard about some of these stories, but apparently Jesus and John the Baptist also spent some time exploring the Orkney Islands in Scotland, and they'll tell you all about it if you're there. Anyway, this girl stole Mary's scissors, and Mary, a more wrathful version of the Holy Mother than we know, punished her by turning her into a northern lapwing. She chose the lapwing because its tail resembles a pair of scissors, and the lapwing only had one call. It says "tavit," which in Swedish means "I stole." The northern lapwing is also said to be present at the crucifixion of Jesus. The story tells us that 3 birds came to Christ's aid on the cross. First, the stork came in and called, "Strengthen him!" Then the swallow tried to actually remove the thorns from his crown. And finally, the northern lapwing came in and circled the cross, crying, "Let him suffer!" Jesus blessed the stork and the swallow, but he condemned the lapwing for all time. And now we have many stories about lapwings as mischievous or even cruel birds. Lapwing's bad reputation extends from Europe into Asia, where a Russian creation story says that when the Slavic god Perun made the world, he gave all the birds a job to carry water to fill all the many indentations for seas, lakes, and rivers. Everyone pitched in except the lapwing, who refused. So God punished the bird by declaring that he would always have to get its water from puddles. Today, if you see a lapwing, you need to look in mud flats with shallow water, just as you would look for any other plover-like bird. But the lapwing is there because he did bad. Centuries later, perhaps as part of its punishment for all of these transgressions, lapwing eggs became a delicacy. The eggs were not cultivated on farms because lapwings don't thrive in domestic life, so the eggs had to be found in the wild, making them a very pricey item in markets, none of which was good for the lapwings. In recent years, the practice has been banned by the European Union, but in the Netherlands, finding the first lapwing egg of the spring is still a custom. There's a catch now, however. The finder now has to leave the egg where he found it. So let's turn now to some of the bravest and most superstitious people on the planet, those who ply their trade on ships at sea. Entire books have been written about the omens and portents brought on by pelagic birds over boats filled with sailors, fishermen, or explorers. Seafarers especially revere the albatross. Any of the 22 species of these magnificent birds, including the Laysan albatross, that we were fortunate enough to see in Hawaii this year. For centuries, having an albatross around your neck has been synonymous with carrying a weighty burden that we can't wait to dispose of as soon as possible. This expression comes from Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which I will not recite for you, in which we learn that killing an albatross is the worst luck of all bad luck, inviting shipwreck and certain death. So how do we counteract this bad omen? The person who killed the bird must wear it on a rope around his neck, literally carrying the burden of the misdeed. An albatross can weigh as much as 18 pounds, so this penance is nothing to take lightly. Albatross lore on the high seas can govern the lives of sailors with endless speculation of whether an albatross following a ship is a good omen with a promise of the bird's protection, or a bad omen of an oncoming storm, with the bird hiding behind the ship to avoid the worst of it. Whichever it turns out to be, there's another twist. The albatross most likely carries the soul of a sailor lost at sea, so whether it's good news or bad news, the bird's protection or its warning are all meant with the best of intentions. Coleridge's poem dominates secret lore, so it may seem that albatrosses are the only birds that affect a sailor's fortune. But the family of northern storm petrels also carry considerable weight with seafarers. The storm part of the name comes from their habit of taking refuge from an oncoming gale by following closely behind a ship, letting the large structure block the worst of the weather for them. Sailors took this as a dependable warning that a storm was on its way, but some thought that the birds actually brought the stormy weather with them, making a flock of storm petrels at a ship's stern a worrisome sight instead of a good one. In fact, some seafarers went so far as to call it good luck if a storm petrel happened to defecate on them as it passed over them. So this is a good time to remind you of the first rule of birding: never look up with your mouth open. Killing a storm petrel, even in retaliation, for the defecation, was and is still considered bad luck, as if the shooter wishes to invite bad weather for a very long stay. So if you want to find yourself caught at sea in the middle of a hurricane, all you have to do is shoot down a storm petrel. As long as we're on the subject of disgusting things people do at sea, fishermen of old observed gray herons, which are essentially the European equivalent of our great blue herons, standing patiently waiting for fish to swim by at just the right distance and decide that something about the heron's feet must attract the fish. So they carried a heron's foot to improve their luck, and some coated their fishing lines with a noxious goo that they made from heron's fat and feet. As this practice has faded, we can assume that it was not effective. I also learned some fairly dark things about birds' lives, and I made a point of including these in the book as well, because people need to know that some of the world's birds face challenges from people with very selfish ends. The parrots of the Caribbean islands have been poached nearly to death for the black market on pet birds. Some of the islands have moved to name these birds as their national symbols, which has released funds and organized efforts to save them. But on some of these islands, it's virtually impossible to see the parrots that were once abundant there. You need special permission to go into wildlife refuges that have highly elevated levels of protection. And in some of them, there are only maybe 30 or 40 parrots remaining. And then we have the fate of the ortolan, a tiny bird that had the bad luck of becoming a delicacy in parts of Europe. Fans of Succession may have heard about the ortolan. There was an episode in which one was consumed. The recipe is gruesome. They fatten the bird up for more than 3 weeks in a cage, kill it by drowning it in Armagnac brandy, and then the chef cooks it and serves it whole. And the gourmands who eat it pop it down in one bite, but first they throw a napkin over their head so no one can see them do this. Whether that is out of shame or just because it's disgusting to eat a whole bird at once, that's a debatable issue. I'm glad to report that the European Union banned this practice, but there are still corners of Europe where the name ortolan makes the mouth water. Finally, let's talk about some birds that don't exist. As we have seen long before we begin to understand birds in scientific terms, miraculous flying creatures became part of nearly every culture's mythology. Sometimes, though, the powers of actual living birds simply don't rise to what the gods need. Birds need to do something more, meld with the body of a god or goddess, for example, or become the lead character in a myth so vivid that it needs a supernatural species to tell it. In Egypt, for example, the god Thoth takes on the mantle of the bird, specifically an African sacred ibis, while he controls the passage of time and the change of seasons. Thoth is the god of the moon, wisdom, writing, hieroglyphics, science, magic, and art. So he's a busy dude. The ibis head allows him to change the pace of the passage of time. Special note, this only works for Thoth. Don't go out and kill an ibis and put it on your head. On the flip side of this benevolence, a mythical bird called an ouzlum provides an excuse for foolishness. It shifts the blame for mistakes away from humans and onto a bird just too silly to behave itself. In British and Australian legend, ouzlum flies in a spiral of tighter and tighter circles until it eventually flies up its own ass. I'm guessing everyone here knows an ouzlum in some form. Here's the Fen Huang, or Chinese phoenix, one of China's 12 ornaments, ancient symbols that denoted the power and authority of the wearer. The ornaments date back to at least 2294 BCE, and perhaps much earlier than that. They would embroider them on the clothing of the highest-ranking people in Chinese society. The description of this beast has changed over the millennia, so this is more or less the most recent version. A golden pheasant's head, a mandarin duck's body, a peacock's tail, a crane's legs, and a parrot's bill. So wherever the Fen Huang appears, it implies the virtue and honesty of the people it adorns. It often appears at weddings, at a blessing of fidelity and harmony, and some households bring it out to display in good times and hide it away when times turn tough. Now, exactly how and where we acquired the legend of the phoenix has been a subject of debate for thousands of years. It appears long before Greek mythology as an immortal bird who eventually tired of its cushy life in paradise. Phoenix traveled to the mortal world where things lived and died, but the bird itself knew that he would always remain immortal. But one night, Phoenix built a nest of twigs, and as he waited for Apollo, the sun god, to arrive, he began to sing. Morning came, and Apollo passed over in his golden chariot, but the sun god so admired Phoenix's song that he actually stopped in midair to listen. As he enjoyed the song, a spark from the sun dropped down onto Phoenix's nest of twigs. The nest ignited, and Phoenix burst into flames, dissolving into ashes. But all was not lost for Phoenix. 3 days later, the magical bird sprang up from the ashes, young and renewed. The bird realized that he could do this again and again, but only once every 1,000 years. So he continues to repeat this cycle of death and rebirth as he will for eternity. So that's the complete language of birds, with stories about nearly 400 species of birds around the world. It's illustrated rather than photographic, as you've seen, with vintage drawings by a wide range of artists, mostly of the 19th and early 20th century. This was just a delight to write. This was a surprise project that came to me pretty much out of nowhere from an editor I hadn't heard from in 5 years. We moved to a new publisher, and all of a sudden I had this huge contract that I had to execute in 6 months. So I hope it's as much fun for you to read as it was for me to write. I thank you for allowing me to share a little bit of this book with you today, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Questions about a specific species that I didn't talk about, or anything like that? No?
Here's a question.
Oh.
I'm right there.
Yep. Hi.
I've been catching birds and mouse traps in my barn. Is that unusual?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I've been catching some birds and mouse traps in my barn. Is that unusual?
Question is, he's been catching some birds and mouse traps in his barn, and is that unusual? Sure, they want the peanut butter, and that's not really unusual at all. It's just accessible to them, where most of the time
it's only going to happen in this cold weather, I guess.
Yeah, they're hungry. Yeah, so I couldn't tell you what to put in the traps instead of peanut butter. Right, exactly. You gotta get the mice, so yeah, it would be hard to say what to put in there instead that they wouldn't want, because they'll eat, this time of year they'll eat cheese or suet or anything that a mouse would want. Yeah?
I used to catch chipmunks that way, but I put a 5-gallon bucket over it and only left a small opening for the mouse, the chipmunk would crawl in there.
Oh, that's a great
It
idea.
has to be very small, half inches.
Okay, if you're looking for a solution to that, this man says he put a 5-gallon drum with a little tiny hole just big enough for a chipmunk over his traps, and that solved the problem. So that's a really good tip. Thank you.
They're mostly woodpeckers.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. Oh, sure, peanut butter. Yeah, that makes sense. Any other questions? Yep.
You see issues involved with bird flu, cats in the yard, and
No, for the most part, bird flu is only showing up in domestic birds, like chickens, and in birds, a few birds of prey. It's not a wide open thing, and at this point, feeder birds are not showing up with bird flu. So and there's no proof that it would pass to cats. So you're okay for now, but I would keep, watch the Cornell Lab of Ornithology website for updates on that, because they are monitoring the heck out of that. Yeah. Yes.
How long will a mating pair of eagles, American bald eagles, stay in the same nest?
Oh man.
We've noticed on our property, I saw them for maybe about 4 years, and now I don't see them anymore. So
Yeah, sometimes the question is about bald eagles and how long will they continue to return to the same nest. It's a very good question. They're finding at Montezuma National Wildlife Refuge, they've had eagles that have come back in the same nest for 20 years or more. But if they feel that there's a threat in the area, and threats can be all kinds of things, they will move on. Or if they have not had a viable egg in a nest, they often will move on from that too. So, pretty much breaking bad habits, just like people would. So, you're very lucky if you have them for 4 years. That's a lot. That's a very cool thing to be able to watch year after year.
Do they leave as a pair?
Yes, the male and female will continue to care for the what's the word? The baby eagle, for lack of a better word. They will continue to care for them in tandem throughout until the eagle fledges. So yeah, for months. And they will come back. They're monogamous, they mate for life, so they will come back over and over. Any other? Yes?
What was the specific billing of the gray parents? And is you know talk to dead people or
The gray parent.
gray parents?
Oh, the gray parent. Okay, yeah. Gray parent. Most parents that can speak, that can mimic, which they're only mimicking people. It's not as if they actually, for the most part, they're not learning language. But the belief is that because they can fly and they can speak, that they can go up to the spirit world and gather messages and bring messages. And the real fear, and this is a real thing that people fear, is that they're going to tally to their gods and to their loved ones, and they're going to get up to the people are going to get up to heaven or whatever it is they believe in, and Stobelcore or whatever it is, and they will find themselves, that everyone there is going to hate them. So it makes people be nicer to each other. Yes.
Okay, I thought wood ducks and mallards could not mate. But recently, Google told me otherwise. And that wood ducks can mate for life, Google told me otherwise. What's the truth? There used to be a mallard female and a wood duck male that came back 2 or 3 years in a row. I've seen them. And they can cross the road with the baby ducks and go on a time and play with power. And they came back year after year. What's up with that?
Well, there is. If you're hearing this is about the male wood duck and female mallard, right? At Schoen Place, and whether there's hybridization possible there. For a long time, it was mallards can hybridize. Okay. Mallards can hybridize between a number of different species of ducks that are mostly surprise to us at this point. It's like, oh, look at that. So there may be a mating there. And the thing is, it's very hard to say. You know, one male mallard will mate with a bunch of females. That's why there's always so many more females. So it's hard to say which duck is actually fathering these chicks. So it may be, they may just have an affection for each other, and she's raising mallard chicks.
They look like mountains.
Yeah, they probably are. And, you know, they may just be good friends. I mean, this happens. Or they may have attempted to mate and they actually produced, you know, hybrid chicks.
I firmly believe that they were involved, and in fact, you're actually there for somebody else.
Well, that's a wonderful thing to believe. You know? And then, you know, and that's kind of the thing. That's kind of the point of this book, too, is that, you know, we kind of want to make up stories about the animal kingdom. We want them to have homes and families and come home at 5 o'clock and have dinner with their kids and all that. The animals don't do that generally. So, but we do see pairs of ducks and communities of ducks that stay together all the time, especially, you know, the ones that have been habituated to humans feeding them and taking care of them.
But neither mallards nor blue ducks mate for life.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they're serial monogamists. Well, the wood ducks are. Wood ducks tend to be, right.
We've got time for one more question, and then I'm sure Randy will be happy to answer some more questions between our break here over at the table, right? Got one final question, anybody? No? Okay, how about a nice hand for